Awesome. So as Kate said, this is our first session of the Lessons from Female Founders series. So before we start, I just want to start by giving the context of why it's so important to have stories from female founders like Barr and others, because hear about the percentage of women founders receiving funding in the venture capital market, right? And even fewer female founders being able to grow their companies to unicorn and plus status, right? And here Barr's done it all. So love to hear about her for her journey. And so to start off, right, a quick bio on Barr. So as Kate mentioned, Barr is the co-founder and CEO of Monte Carlo Data, a data reliability company and creator of the industry's first data observability platform. So our company is backed by, and this is a very star-studded list of VCs, Excel, GGV, Redpoint, Iconic Growth, Salesforce Ventures, and a whole slew of other top-tier Silicon Valley investors. Previously, she was the VP of Customer Operations at customer success company Gainsight, where she helped scale the company 10x in revenue, and among other functions, built the data and analytics team. Prior to that, she was a management consultant at Bain & Company and a research assistant at the statistics department at Stanford University. She's also served in the Israeli AirForce as a commander of an intelligence data analyst unit. Barr graduated from Stanford with a bachelor's in Mathematical and Computational Science. So, wow, what a star-studded bio. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see some familiar faces in the audience too. Hi, everyone.
So to start, right, I see definitely a theme around, computational science and data analytics, and leading, of course, to your last role before you started Monte Carlo. Is what first got you interested in data and analytics?
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. I was born and raised initially in Israel. Moved to the Bay Area about a little over a decade ago now. Last few years, I don't even know what happened. So I would say like 13, 14 years or so. And as everyone here for sure knows, like the data and analytics space has changed a ton. So even what data meant is not the same 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or today. I studied math and stats. Actually, my dad is a physics professor, and so I thought I was going to go into academia. I worked for the statistics department for a bit, and then that was my big fail my dad moment. I was like, this isn't working. It's not going to happen. And so I kind of shifted gears and turned to industry. And throughout my career, I've been really fortunate to work with companies on their journey to become data-driven, again, whatever that meant. And 5-10 years ago, it was really kind of a handful of people in an organization trying to figure out like how many customers you had, or sending up revenue, some really fundamental questions. Looking at it today, some things have changed, some haven't. We're still asking some of those fundamental questions. But throughout my career, kind of really, working with different organizations, Fortune 500 and others, there was always sort of this effort to become data-driven and to make sense of data. So whether it was as a management consultant, working with organizations to make decisions based on data that are more strategic decisions. So go-to-market questions or new product launches, or questions about customer segmentation, or oftentimes actually strategic questions where there was very limited data and you actually have to make decisions based on bad data or no data at all. And most, prior to Monte Carlo, I joined Gainsight, kind of part of the Gainsight helped create the customer success category. And as part of that, it was really about helping organizations make decisions about their customer base based on data. How do you think about what does a healthy customer look like? What sort of signals can you use in the data to learn about what, whether you can predict a churn or whether you can prevent a churn, a churning customer? And so, throughout my life, I sort of use data differently. There's been this common theme, though, that has led me to start Monte Carlo, which is it was really hard to answer some of the fundamental questions about data. And while it's become a lot easier today to process data, to store data, to transform data, it's still really hard to actually have trust in the data. That's kind of what led me to Monte Carlo.
That's awesome. Just hearing about that journey, because one of the driving principles, and I see a few product managers in the audience here, right, is at Amazon we have this principle of working backwards from the customer. So the way that you just described how you saw a problem, right, and what is this, untrust or distrust, right, lack of trust around data. What actually problems downstream does that then result for customers based on your learnings?
I love that principle. And actually, like at Monte Carlo, we think a lot about that. Sort of our very first and core value is customer impact. It's actually funny. Prior to starting Monte Carlo, I was in the customer success business. And so, when we wrote our values as a company, we were about 4 or 5 people. And I was like, oh, it's gonna be cliche if we sort of use customer impact. Like, it's kind of like something that everyone says. Is it really going to be authentic? And I was like, okay, I'll leave it out. Maybe no one will notice. And I was talking to my team, and my team was like, are you crazy? Like, there's nothing that matters but customers. That is our true sort of North Star. Everything should reflect our customers, our product, our team, our brand. There's really nothing else that matters. And I was like, yeah, okay. I'm not going to be able to get away with that. But also sort of reminded me sort of in grounding in what's most important. And actually, prior to starting Monte Carlo, what's led us to sort of defining what we think the category, but more importantly, the pain point that we're solving is actually through conversations with customers. So before actually starting the company, I had over actually several hundred conversations with folks in data, whether it's, data engineers, data analysts, heads of data, CTO. Some of you in the audience here have been part of those conversations, actually. I asked the question, sort of, what's keeping you up at night these days? And asked that time and time and again. And this problem that we later defined as data downtime, periods of time when data is wrong or inaccurate or otherwise erroneous, came up again and again. Everyone was saying, look, there's one thing that I'm responsible for, which is the data. And actually, it's really hard when folks can't trust it. And what does that look like? Maybe I'm about to present a report for my CMO tomorrow, and at 8 a.m., just 15 minutes before the meeting, I'm finding that the report is actually wrong, and the discussion is going to be moved, right? Or Friday at 5 p.m., it's always a minute before the weekend, I get an email saying, everything is down, the reports look wrong, what's going on, right? How many times have folks here got an email like that, right? I see some nods. It's always before the weekend, always at the worst timing. And that was sort of a shared pain, if you will. Like, folks everywhere felt that. That was really frustrating. And it sort of cut across industries and also cut across size of companies. So, no one was sort of shielded from that. It sort of struck me as kind of a very real and painful problem that I personally experienced, but also lots of other folks have experienced. And when I think about what the implications of data downtime are, oftentimes the problem with data being wrong is that data teams are actually, ironically, the last to know about it. Oftentimes, if something is wrong with, in a particular table, let's say data hasn't arrived or data is late, the folks who actually sort of find out about it are the folks downstream, the consumers of the data. Maybe it's that CMO or that analyst that's using the data. And oftentimes the data engineering team doesn't even know about that until someone downstream tells you about that. And so the first problem that we set out was, can we make data teams be able to be the first to know about data problems, right? How can we sort of reduce the time to detection as much as possible? That was kind of the beginning of our journey, if you will. Again, because going back to the customer, that was the most profound pain that folks talked about, like literally waking up, sweating at night, worrying about whether the data will be accurate tomorrow morning or not. Just kind of deep pain.
So when you speak about this pain, right, typically there are different buyer personas within a company, right? The users, the folks who write the checks. Where did you find that your message most resonate? Like, who did you start that conversation with?
Yeah, so I think the industry has changed tremendously. So if you think about we started the company about 3 years ago, right around the time that Tableau and Looker got acquired, was exactly that same week. Folks remember it was the summer of 2019. Fast forward to today, Snowflake has actually been the largest software IPO of all time, right? And so data has come a long way in the last few years. That's one kind of thing that changed. Another big thing that changed is actually the types of roles and types of people who are in data. So there's this rise of new roles. So data engineering being one of them several years ago. And even today, data engineering is a little bit like not totally sure what that role does, what it includes, what it doesn't. ML engineers, data product managers, right? A lot of new roles are coming up, very exciting. And also folks from different backgrounds. So I think before data oftentimes sort of was part of an IT function in a company typically. And again, was typically very small. Today, we see companies, doubling, tripling the size of their data team, making significant investments in data, and hiring for all these different roles. I was just at a CEO conference, and one of the CEOs was like, the number one advice that I can give you is make investments in your data team. Sort of the benefits far outweigh our investment in it, above and beyond. And so I'm, obviously very, very bullish on the data space. I think it's one of the most interesting spaces. It's actually, I think, projected to be the fastest growing IT spend. It's going to be on data infrastructure in the next 5 years. And so, when going back to sort of our journey at Monte Carlo, we've spoken to all of those personas actually, largely classified as data scientists, data analysts, and data engineers. And what we found is that with this change in kind of data engineering, with this new role, that's really where sort of the responsibility for data downtime lied. So the interesting thing about data downtime, again, sort of, periods of time when data is wrong for whatever reason, is that so many people are influenced. So I'll give you an example for what data downtime could look like. Let's say, someone on your engineering team is making a change to your website, and then someone downstream is impacted by that, was unaware of that change. And now, as a result of that, data is not arriving for a particular table in your data warehouse. And there's actually 3 reports that rely on that particular table that now have incorrect data. Think about the number of people are influenced by just that chain of events, right? It's the engineer, the data engineering who's actually running the data warehouse. It's the analyst that's using the report. It's the business team that's using the report. Probably the data product manager is responsible for this overall. So just with one incident, you actually have 4, 5, 6 people are involved with it. I think that's kind of where a lot of the problems in organizations surface when there's lots of people trying to coordinate on it, and the stakes are high, right? I heard this anecdote: Shopify grew from 0 to several hundred data products in just a matter of the last couple of years, right? So the concept of having more and more products actually rely on data is, sort of advanced tremendously. My favorite anecdotes for this is actually in 2016, Netflix was down for 45 minutes. Sort of feels unheard of. You could watch a full episode of Selling Sunset or something in 45 minutes. But that was because of duplicate data, literally duplicate data. And they actually have a very interesting talk about this, how that's kind of like initiated this whole internal effort around data downtime, basically, and data reliability. And so if you think about more and more products that are now being powered by data, the importance of making sure that data is accurate is more important than ever. And so, again, for us, kind of the focus is, I would say data engineering, data analyst, but I think it touches so many people.
Well, I think just the way you describe this journey of, the starting sort of the contributing factors around, maybe a report or missing data, right? Or maybe even stale data, redundant data, leading to potential outages or impacts downstream to customers. So I think one thing that, I tell a lot of my community to watch what you do is you've essentially coined and created this net new market around data observability. Is, in 2019, I feel like not a lot of people were talking about that. And certainly no one was well-versed, and certainly not as well-versed as you just clearly articulated it, around the impacts and the after effects, right? Is what maybe mental model did you have thinking about entering an existing market versus creating a net new one?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to be part of kind of the story of helping to create the customer success category, and so I'm really fortunate to learn a lot through that. There's a lot of things that really suck about starting a new category. You're building a product that's never been built. You're trying to sell a product that's never been sold. and you're trying to help customers see value that's never seen before, you're really doing a lot of things that are very hard, that have never done before. You're sort of beating the odds at every step of the way. And a lot of how we think about company building is with that. Like, what's our hypothesis for right now? What do we need to prove to ourselves? So in the early days, it's like we need to prove to ourselves there's a real problem that someone cares about. And then, we need to prove to ourselves that actually someone, would pay for this or would care for it. And then we can actually show value. And so there's really kind of hypothesis driven, if you will. But yeah, generally, I think the key for us was we just had so much conviction, and I still do, that this is a tremendously important problem, one that's going to grow in importance, and that there's no way that the world won't have something like this. And I'll explain why. So, when you're kind of thinking about the problem of data downtime, it sort of begs the question of like, what's the solution for that? And data teams are out there trying to deliver data products, and they don't know if their data is reliable or not, or don't know if it's accurate or can be trusted. And I remember sort of turning to our engineering counterparts, and they had all these off-the-shelf solutions like New Relic, AppDynamics, Datadog, Splunk, which help them make sure that infrastructures and applications are reliable. And data teams literally had nothing off the shelf, right? There was a lot of sort of manual kind of writing of scripts, and perhaps, back in the day, there was a lot of like eyes on reports, right? So people would have like 6, 7, or 6, 8 pairs of eyes to validate every report before it went out, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it, right? Like, how many people do you need to like manually validate the numbers? That's what data teams have today. Like, that's what we have to make sure that the data is trusted, which is really nuts. And if you believe in a world where data is becoming more and more important, and you have more and more people using data, so if you think about it, again, prior, there was only a small handful of people actually having access to data. But today, there's sometimes hundreds and thousands of people who can use data for making decisions, for building products, for machine learning models. There's so many new use cases. And so all of these people now need to be able to trust the data. And so we can't continue to live in a world where you need 4, 6, 8 pairs of eyes to make sure that data is accurate, right? It just doesn't make sense. And so I think in the same way that any engineering team that gets started uses something like New Relic or Datadog to make sure that their apps and infrastructure are reliable, in the same way any data team needs something to make sure that their data is accurate and reliable. And so kind of think, starting the company, we really thought, this category will exist. It's inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And thinking about, again, sort of the acceleration in the last few years, we think the time is now. A lot of the questions that we had in the early days of category creation was actually like, what words do you use and how do you define it, right? Data observability is hard to pronounce, and I was a little bit against it. I was like, it's going to be really hard for us to explain that. But going back to our customers, actually our customers were most drawn to that term, and our customers repeated that to us. And so we really had to listen to the market here. I clearly didn't have the right answer. Our customers did. And so when our customers started repeating to us, data observability is important, people started telling us, hey, we actually are presenting a data observability initiative to our board. Industry analysts started to use the word data observability. There are now categories for data observability, which like blows my mind. And so a lot of that is because, again, it kind of came from customers. The other thing that we had to do was actually define what data observability is. It's very well defined in DevOps, right? In sort of New Relic, AppDynamics, Datadog, it's actually pretty clear what to measure, right? It wasn't clear in data observability. We didn't know that. But we did believe that in the same way that there is sort of a consistent set of metrics or framework for what to measure for SREs, in the same way, we should have the same kind of consistent metric for data teams. And so we actually, took it on ourselves to come up with a framework for that. So we took kind of all the great conversations that we had in the early days of company buildings, the several hundreds of people that we talked to, and we actually came up with a framework for what data observability is, and we call that the 5 data observability pillars, which includes freshness, schema, volume, distribution, and lineage. I won't go into each of them, but that kind of gave us a language to start talking about what does it mean to trust your data. And we've also built the product around that. So that's literally what our product does. And it's been honestly really enlightening to see our customers take that and sort of have a life of its own, if you will. I think that's kind of maybe the most rewarding part is actually what customers are doing with the data observability category and kind of the innovations that's coming out there.
So you talk a lot about customers and how you've engaged over time. So walk us back to maybe some of the early days where you had to work on building that trust. And I see this with a lot of early stage startups where they maybe go in and do a risk assessment or some other, POC. So describe a POC that you did with customers to help them build trust and seeing that they did in fact have a gap in this data quality area.
Yeah, so we were, my co-founder Lior, and he's a CTO as well. We talk a lot about sort of what's the problem that we're trying to solve and getting real customer feedback. Another value is ship and iterate, which is really around honoring our imperfections and recognizing that what we will release first will not be perfect, and that's actually okay. It's way more important to get real feedback from customers. And so, we started the company, we sort of released our MVP. Well, actually, I'll tell the story. We started the company with just the two of us, and we had a good sense of like what we wanted to build and what we want to do. And I was like, okay, Lior, he's an engineer. And I was like, okay, why don't you go to the basement and start coding and let me know when you're done, and we'll go out and start selling it. And that didn't work. And Lior was like, well, why don't we actually find a real customer that we can work with and solve this? And so we did, and we found a couple of customers who actually told us this is a huge pain point for us. And we're very crisp about the impact on the company, on their organization, whether it's spending north of 30 to 80% of their time on data fire drills, or maybe it's kind of a big incident that costs them a lot of revenue. So an example, actually, recently in the media, Unity, a gaming company, reported that they lost north of $100 million because of a problem with their data. So their mobile ads is based on data from the App Store, I believe, and that data was inaccurate, which resulted in that tremendous loss. And so companies feel it viscerally. So going back to the early days, we found a couple companies who kind of felt the pain, recognized it, and allowed us to work with them. And so we worked hand in hand with them. We actually didn't charge them in the very early days. And I remember our first design partner that came up to me after a couple of months, and he was like, well, this is a great service. It's a great product. We want to pay. And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean you want to pay? Hold on. Are you sure? We're just getting started, and, we just released this. And he was like, yeah, we're actually seeing a lot of value. And I was so suspicious. I was like, okay, I'm not look, why don't you let us go, get back to work and show a little bit more value and we come back. And we actually had this conversation 3 times. And then the third time I'm like, okay, this has got to stop. Okay. And so, and that's actually how we started selling. Really, again, with sort of a customer-led approach. So for us, the focus from day one, or the way in which we gained trust, was by trying to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers and asking ourselves, what would they need? And for me, I was responsible for a data team at Gainsight, and you're basically overwhelmed with vendors and with options and things to do. One of the biggest things is you don't have time for a 6 to 9 month implementation. You don't have time to dedicate engineers to help build anything. You really you have very little resources when you're trying to get going and do so many things. And so one of the things that we focus on is how do we minimize onboarding time and how do we show value extremely quickly? And we've invested a lot of engineering effort on our end to make it extremely easy for our customers to do that. So actually our implementation today for kind of a modern tech stack is often actually typically under 30 minutes. So within 30 minutes of the customer's effort, you're up and running. Within 24 hours, you've accessed the product and you can already sort of start seeing value. And so that was really important to us, and we did that from day one. And I think that's one of the things that are most memorable for customers. One of your first interactions with your product, with your team.
Yeah, user experience is so key. And that's one thing that a lot of the product managers focus on, right? Because if that's your first impression of how the product works, think about deployment time, think about implementation time, to your point. So one actually metric that really caught my eye about Monte Carlo, it says that in 2021, your renewal rate was 100%. That's just phenomenal. So I'll pause there. And that means 100% of your customers found value and loved your product so much that they came back again, right? So can you walk us through maybe some top customer use cases and maybe lighthouse customers that you've had in several verticals?
Yeah, for sure. And, I'll just use this opportunity to say a big thank you to our customers. Like, we literally would not exist without many of the customers who, are still taking a chance on us every single day. And, we, earn the right to work with our customers every day. Our customers are the real kind of pioneers, if you will, of the category. It's definitely not us. And so, very, very grateful for everyone who did that. I think in terms of like use cases and types of companies that we work with, it really sort of runs a gamut from gaming, media, e-commerce. Which help make sure that the data is accurate before they work with Monte Carlo. And the use cases for their data, largely there's sort of two main use cases. One is for the operations, so literally the flights, bookings, and the second is for their customer support and customer experience. And so if a flight gets delayed, if someone needs a connection, if someone needs to transfer, all of that information is actually based on data that's collected and used by the teams there. And so you can imagine, anyone here who has experienced a delay in their flight or missed a flight and didn't have the connection, how terrible is that if it's because of bad data, right? And so the JetBlue team is actually, a big user of sort of the modern data stack with Snowflake and dbt, and adopted Monte Carlo since they started looking for a solution to move from this world where they were really manually looking at the data and making sure that it's accurate, to having sort of a proactive notification and proactive approach to data observability. And so, we talk a little bit about a data reliability lifecycle. So sort of three core parts of it. The first is detection, which is being the first to know about data breaking. The second is resolution. So once you know that there's a problem, how quickly can you resolve it? And then the third is actually prevention. So with kind of strong practices in place and frameworks and modes of communication, can you actually prevent these issues to begin with? So many of our customers report to us sort of north of 70% of data downtime incidents completely reduced, actually due to starting to think about it and operationalize it this way and thinking about sort of the diligence that it requires. So that's one example. Another fun example is actually Fox. From the media space. So they cover events that all of you probably know, like the election and Super Bowl. And they use data around, number of users, number of devices, bandwidth, content, and make decisions based on that. And their executives get, daily reports based on data that, they use for making decisions. And you can imagine that, these reports, probably, they don't go unnoticed. I can tell you that when there are issues. There's some, really cool examples kind of from across the board. These are just a couple.
Yeah, so pivoting here a little bit, right? I see a lot of, women in the room. And for a lot of us, right, we've been through, being the only woman in the room or in a leadership situation. The reason why, again, near dear to my heart, why I wanted to feature you in this series is so that we can highlight the profiles and backgrounds of more women founders, especially of B2B companies, infrastructure companies. So what are some ways that we here in the room or audience or virtually online can make more room for women founders?
It's a great question. And I will say, if anyone here is inspired to do it, go for it, right? I think, for me, starting the company, actually wasn't sure that I wanted to start the company. I actually took a couple months off, I think I watched Netflix for a full week back when it was actually not socially acceptable to do that. I feel like today it's a little bit more socially acceptable because of the pandemic. Back then it was not. I went on this like week-long meditation retreat, kind of did some soul searching, and ultimately decided to start a company. I actually started 3 companies in parallel because I wanted to get conviction, around the idea and the market and the opportunity, and that was really, really helpful for me to kind of start a few and see what product market fit could look like and not look like. Some of the ideas that I worked on were terrible. And I was like, there's not going to be a company here ever, no matter what I do. So that was really helpful, but it was a journey. And so, I think for, I would just say, just do it. There's not much advice other than that, to be honest. And I think a lot of the ways that kind of helped at least me is kind of look at actually like folks that give me inspiration and examples. RBG being one of them. Actually, my daughter is named after RBG. My daughter Ray is named after RBG, and I think she's like a good example of someone who actually like changed the system from within. Actually made a lot of influence over the years, but did that through the system actually. And so I think about that a lot. How can we create strong examples by working within the system? And I think we can talk a lot about it, but at the end of the day, what we can do at Monte Carlo is create more examples like that. And so for us, it's about getting in there every day, showing up, and building the best and biggest company that we can. If we can build an iconic company that leaves a mark on the industry, that I think will go much further than anything that I can ever say. So for us, it's about, building a great company, doing it in a way that we can really be proud of the journey and looking back and say, like, we made a difference. And so for me, it's, I wake up every day and, that's what I think about. How can we build the biggest and most impactful company as fast as possible to make the change that we want to see?
Recently, I saw a photo on LinkedIn of your development and R&D workforce, right? And it was very, very inclusive. So can you walk us through what is your recruiting strategy for building inclusive teams?
Great question. We've tried lots of different things. I can't tell you that we're perfect. It's something that we work on and think about a lot. I think more than anything, it's just something that's top of mind for us all the time, and we think about it and we prioritize it. We've done things like our head of engineering, work with we work with recruiting agencies, and as a startup, with limited resources, you rely a lot on that in the early days for sure. Before we had any kind of internal in-house recruiters, we actually don't have yet today. We've largely kind of relied on kind of our hiring managers to recruit. But when, working with some of these agencies, there was a period of time when we told them, let's stop all recruiting and only recruit minorities, female, women, people of color. And, that's, we only want to look at those kind of candidates. And they said, sure. And after literally 48 hours, they came back to us and said, we're done. That's it. We don't have any more. Which is crazy, right? And so just to give an example, I'm saying that, because I think it's sort of an ongoing thing that we have to do all the time and think about all the time. We're trying different things. And, I think that there's a lot to be proud in terms of kind of the amazing people on the Monte Carlo team. And I want to thank them actually for spending so much time on recruiting and trying to build a great company and a great culture. We recently did a survey and we won Best Places to Work for the second year in a row. And maybe the thing that I'm most proud of, that's most important to me, is there was a question there around, do you see career opportunities for yourself? Do you see kind of professional opportunities? And 100% of women said yes, which I think is really important, creating, not only a space where folks feel comfortable, but also see opportunities for them in the future. Yeah.
Oh, that's great tips. And actually, that's one of the top questions, someone asked me is, where do we find women engineers, right? Or sufficient candidates to staff roles? And the answer becomes, well, you're not looking hard enough, right? And that's really, one answer I gave to a founder friend of mine is you have to be creative about looking in different communities, right? Making sure that your postings are inclusive and you're not turning folks away or looking at your job descriptions. So definitely kudos to you and your team for achieving that balance. So one last prepared question before we go to audience questions is around fundraising. All right, so this statistic just jumped out at me the other day, which is in 2021, PitchBook data shows that less than 2% of venture funding was given to women-only founders, right? So as you and your co-founder have successfully raised over $100 million in VC funding, so can you, as someone with firsthand experience going through that fundraising process as a female founder of an infrastructure company, how did that fundraising process go for you? And what advice can you share with the aspiring founders in the audience?
Yeah, we're fortunate to have amazing investors and folks on our board. Former CEOs and founders, folks with, years of experience on, variety of boards. They've seen the movie. I think that's maybe kind of the kind of best advantage. They've seen other companies. We can learn from their mistakes. We can learn from their failures, from their successes. And I think that's kind of the biggest sort of value add. I think on our journey in particular, I can't tell you that we've done anything particularly special other than focusing on our customers. I think that was from day one was the focus. And I think that's what's carried us through. And so focusing on building a business with strong fundamentals, having, we always say there's only two things that matter at Monte Carlo: making customers as happy as possible and getting as many customers as possible. That's it. If you're not working on one of those two things, you're working on something that doesn't matter, just stop, don't do it. But everyone is contributing at the end of the day to one of those two things. And happy customers are, what makes, our world go round, right? And so in a lot of actually sort of the fundraisers that we've done, investors actually spoke to dozens of our customers without even talking to us. They just reached out to our customers and asked them about Monte Carlo. And got really high marks across the board and got really strong advocacy. And so in the end, it's actually our customers who, to a certain degree, raise that for us, if you will. And I think, I don't know if it's advice, but sort of what's worked for us is, again, really focusing on solving a real problem that people care about, showing value quickly, building trust with our customers. And that ultimately, I think helped sort of create sort of a brand that, folks wanted to be a part of. That honestly, a lot of that is what helps us with recruiting also as well. We write a lot of content. We spend a lot of time on things that help our customers beyond their day to day. And so that has helped us in a lot of areas, whether it's company building, recruiting, or fundraising. So in the end, I think it comes back to those fundamentals.
Yeah, building a positive flywheel effect. So I noticed that you write often, right? There's tons of blogs, and every time I go to LinkedIn, I feel like I see a new blog from you. What inspires you to write, and how do you find that inspiration and also discipline, right, to write so frequently?
Oh man, the first blog I wrote, I think it took me more than a month. It was terrible. Actually, English is my second language. That's why I studied math and stats. So actually writing is really hard for me. And I also joke I think in Monte Carlo, there's a lot of recovering perfectionists. We really want to get it all right. That email has to be right, that code has to be right, everything has to be perfect and very scalable and everything has to work. And actually, it's way better to just get the blog out and fix something later. And after I wrote the first blog, it took me so long. I was like, okay, never again. I cannot spend a month on writing something like that. And I think the other thing that helps me is also, as a startup, the worst thing is that nobody cares. That's really the thing that will kill you as a startup. It's actually fine if people love you or hate you, as long as there's some reaction. So I think a lot about that, and that reminds me, that pushes me, right? We have to put ourselves out there. We have to show up. We have to be in the arena. And this is part of it for me. It's putting a part of myself out there and writing that. I have an amazing team that helps me, it gives me inspiration. And more than anything, it's my customers that inspire me. So most of the content actually comes from our customers. And that, we ask folks, what's top of mind for you? What are you thinking about? not too long ago, data mesh took the data world by storm. So we wrote a little bit about that and spent some time there. People started asking us, I'm a data leader and I need to prove to my board that data is important. How do I show the ROI on my team? How do I explain that what I'm doing is valuable? So we wrote something about that. Or, for example, not too long ago, a customer asked us about how should they build their team, what roles to hire. So again, all of those things are things that come from our customers that they're asking themselves. At the end of the day, a lot of what folks want to know is that what they're thinking about and what they're going through is normal, and that a lot of other people are going through the same thing. So for us, it's kind of a way to give back to our customers and our community. But most of it really comes from our customers at the end of the day.
That's awesome. And as a fellow procrastinator, I can say, I share a lot of the same sentiment around let's just get it out for sure. So we're going to turn to audience-led questions. So for folks who want to submit questions, there's a QR code on the board. There's already questions in here, and I see some people have upvoted them. So we're going to start with the first most popular question is, how did you come up with the name Monte Carlo? I am curious myself as well.
Great question. So actually, so when I was working in the statistics department, work with Monte Carlo simulation. So that's kind of the very first sort of encounter with it. Monte Carlo simulation, folks don't know, it's basically a way to predict an outcome, particular scenario, when you don't have sort of a closed model for it. Easiest explanation, or the easiest way to think about this is it's very hard to actually predict the outcome of the election, for example. And if folks are familiar with 538, they actually run Monte Carlo simulations. They run 40,000 simulations nationwide to try to predict the outcome. So that's actually just the origination of it. But when it came to company naming, I did not have a lot of time to choose a name. That's the real honest answer. Not very much. I think I had 24 hours. We were started working with customers, and I was like, okay, we have to come up with a name. This is silly. We can't sign the documentation with our own names, with our personal names. So we did not have a lot of time. And, I opened my stats book in my office, and I was flipping through, and the first option was Bayes' theorem, which was not great. And the next option was Markov chains, which was even worse. And then the third after that was Monte Carlo. And I was like, okay, we can work with that. And it just stuck.
Nice. Well, definitely, I'll take that tip. Next time we have to go through a naming exercise at Amazon, I'll take out my old finance textbook and see what I end up with. So the next question is, what is the impact of data quality for machine learning use cases?
Yeah, great question. I think fundamentally, one of the sort of biggest problems, or I'll just take it sort of specific or kind of basic example. Oftentimes, machine learning models might rely on sort of thousands of different data sources that need to get updated regularly. If one of them doesn't show up, you can imagine sort of the implications, right? In particular, that model. It depends a little bit on the particular use case. So it might be powering a pricing algorithm, might be powering sort of different use cases in a marketplace, for example, scenario, which are very common. And so I would say, similarly, the impact of bad data is actually really sort of plagues every different area in data, right? There isn't a particular area we can say, oh, that's spared from it, right? If your model is running on outdated data or partial data or data that's just plain wrong, the results that you will get are wrong, and whatever it's powering will often be off too. So we definitely see that as well. I don't see that as many use cases as in sort of analytical use cases. It definitely comes up for sure.
And the next one, so you talked about in the customer use cases, Fox, right, as well as JetBlue, and those are both fairly mature, established companies. So at what stage of development or maturity do you advise companies start thinking about data quality as a problem they should solve?
Great question. So we actually put together this maturity model back in the day to try to sort of help customers classify themselves where they are on this journey. And I would say I'll walk through the maturity curve, but I'll just say that in today's world, any company that has, a data warehouse, a data lake, ETL, BI, ML model, probably has to be thinking about data observability. Like if you're actually using the data, you need to make sure it's accurate. I think it's that simple. And so in that sense, it can be a company that's, a couple hundred people or hundreds of thousands of people. It's really about, do you actually have data, and is the data driving something that's high stakes? Is anyone actually using the data? And so, the maturity model, kind of how we describe it, is that the very first sort of step, or the very first part of the journey, is kind of a reactive phase. We're really sort of what it feels like to be when you're in that stage is you're waking up in the morning, everything is broken all the time. You're getting emails from your CEO, from your board, from your customers saying why the number's wrong. It feels like everything is on fire, and that's really a typical day for you. That happens a lot, more than you think. Maybe not as dramatic, but it happens. That's really kind of the reactive stage. Oftentimes in these situations, teams then typically start looking at data observability. They might start small, having something rudimentary set up, or just a couple of kind of, scripts running in the background or something like that. Check for row count, really basic stuff. That's sort of what I would call proactive. You're actually starting to think about it. You're starting to prioritize it. The third stage is automated. And you're trying to think about broad coverage. So I'll give you an example. If you have, tens of thousands of tables in your data warehouse, and there's one that's particularly late, and you watch for that in particular. But then, you actually need to think about an automated way. You're not going to write, a test for every single table. It needs to get updated on time. And so how do you actually do it in an automated way and get coverage across tables and across your data assets? And then the fourth is actually scalable. So when you're not only thinking about this in an automated way, but a scalable way, and that can be, not just for your data warehouse, for a couple of data warehouses, for data lake, across sort of what we call end-to-end for your data stack. So all the way from ingestion to consumption. That's how we think about that. I think people have basically sped through the maturity curve, if you will, basically overnight. It's a little bit binary. It's do I care about the data being accurate or not, is really what we see. So it's actually quite a fast shift, if you will, from that perspective.
And so I'll end the fireside chat on a fun note this evening, which is, what experience, or maybe let's do this, right? What class from Stanford has been the most instrumental in your founder journey so far?
Oh man, that's a good question. There's been lots of classes. There's one that was called Math Magic, which was about it was about magic that's based on math. And so there's actually a book. The professor is called Percy Diakonis. Fascinating person. Recommend reading the book and learning about him. And I was not very good at the class, but it was actually a lot of fun coming up with a magic trick based on math, and doing various things like that. And I think more than anything, that's sort of a combination of, I think, what I sort of enjoy doing, which is working on hard stuff, having fun along the way. You have only one life. You better do it with people that you love, and working on things that you think matters. And that class, I think, definitely symbolized that for me.
That's awesome. I feel like Stanford has a interesting way of picking very cool class names. There's another one that a lot of my friends who went to GSB really love, is the touchy-feely class as well, right? That goes into human emotions. So anyway, with that said, thank you so much, Barr, for joining us tonight and kicking off the lessons from female founders.
Thank you for having me.
And one final plug is for those of you in the audience who are interested in starting startups, the AWS Startups team will be kicking off their female founder cohort in July. So please apply online. I know I've given that advice to actually a team of female founders, to ex-BMD data security engineers to apply for that cohort. So looking forward to seeing you there.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Yeah.